Hey guys, what's up? Mad Season here, back with another video for you. There are two types of MMO players. People who play only because their friends are playing, and the solo player. This is quite a divisive topic, but having recently jumped into old school RuneScape with the challenge of trying to complete every quest blind, through the rules of the challenge I of course have to take a very solo, single player oriented approach as to avoid any sort of help or spoilers. And there's brought up some discussion on my channel about solo play in MMOs, whether that be people who are simply curious as to how I can enjoy such a social genre of game solo, or even as far as people saying I'm playing it incorrectly. So today I'd like to tackle the subject of solo play in the MMORPG genre, because I'm certainly not the only one. So the MMORPG is a very social genre of game, one of the most social possible in the sense that much of the content in the game you can't even access solo. You have this PvP mode, which requires a full team. The high-end raiding requires not only other people, but also direct communication in order to overcome the challenges. Or maybe to make this weapon, you need a crafting reagent from another class, and the list goes on and on. It is true that the entire genre and its systems are largely designed with the thought in mind that they're to be experienced on a multiplayer basis, and it's been one of its biggest selling points, perhaps the entire reason to play them. Taking an objective look at it, the general gameplay of the MMO is very grindy and tedious, but because of the simple fact that it's multiplayer, everything is amplified and made to be more appealing. I've always said that with World of Warcraft's worldwide adoption in the 2000s, it became one of the very first forms of social media. A lot of people don't think of it like that, but I think it's true. You have these online communities, you have these cliques that form, drama that happens, these fads that start, guilds, social hierarchies, and you can always shitpost about politics with random strangers on the internet and threaten to kill them if they disagree with you. So it has all of the ingredients because, again, it is a very social game. But yet, even still, the game is filled with players who are guildless, their friends list is empty, and their only chat message is a typo that they didn't mean to send. So the question is, why? What is the appeal of playing this very social genre of game, but yet still interacting with very little to none of its players? Well, as it turns out, there are many reasons, starting in no particular order with the fact that a lot of it just comes down to having the option. And even if you choose to not interact with other players, their existence still adds value to your gameplay. And I think the best way to explain this is with a question. What's more appealing to you to play? An MMO world populated with other people of different classes, skill sets, abilities, and interests from across the world, or the same MMO on a private server where it's just you and only you? In a vacuum, for someone who doesn't really interact with anyone else, the answer is, well, it doesn't really matter, because, well, what's the difference if you're not going to interact with anyone? But yet still, for most people, this first option is much more appealing. So why is that? Well, it's because even if you don't interact with people, having the option to, and just having them in your world, adds value to your gameplay experience. MMORPGs are massively multiplayer, and they're also RPGs, a genre of game which is built upon many pillars, one of the most major being character progression. And while in single-player RPGs, it can be quite rewarding to watch the story unfold and to see your character grow in power, one of the core pillars of the MMORPG is that all of this progression is relative. This is especially true in the more theme park oriented games, but your gear set is only as powerful as everyone else's on your server. Your mount is only rare because it's relatively rare on your server within your community, and the same can be said with everything, whether that be levels, PvP rank, raid progression, achievement point systems, collections, and so on. And even if you don't interact with them, having the option to is still valuable and comforting. It just kind of taps into the core social nature that we have as humans. A lot of games have recognized this at this point, and they've implemented these seemingly pointless lobby-based hubs into their games. The game itself might rely on primarily a solo, or at most a limited few-player co-op experience, But yet still you have these areas and hubs where you can see strangers doing their own thing. You can't really interact with them directly, which leads many to the question of, well, what's the point of this? Well, the point is to tap into this fundamental social part of ourselves that lies within every person, and maybe a little sprinkle of the bandwagon appeal where we assign value to a thing based on other people doing that same thing. But getting back to MMOs here, again, emphasizing this shared experience even if you don't directly interact with someone. Although it is true that the genre has become less social over the years, and we'll talk about that more later, it has been one of the major draws of the genre from the beginning, is that you are in this shared online world, and things that you do affect other players, and things that other players do affect you. That's an appealing trait. It's a much more dynamic and changing environment that's impossible to find in your conventional single-player RPG or on a private server of your favorite MMO. So point number one is that even if you're not directly interacting with other players, their presence has value and impact on your personal experience, which leads us into perhaps an obvious but still important point: dynamic experience and change. MMOs are still largely unique in the sense that, barring some sort of catastrophic scenario forcing a shutdown, they're RPGs without end. Think of your favorite RPG ever made. The story's perfect, characters are perfect, gameplay, minigames, world. Everything from start to finish in every corner is what the kids these days would say is cinema, except for one thing: the fact that it ends. And eventually you see all that there is to see. And while some players love them so much that the first thing they do after finishing it is to start a new file, or perhaps speedrunning it, for most of the player base, it's the end of the road, which brings us to, again, another core pillar of the MMO, is that it's, of course, continuously updated. The finish line is perpetually dangled in front of you like a carrot on a stick. Content in all corners of the game is constantly added for every type of player, whether that be the high-end raiders or PvPers or skillers, farmers, or questers. And with the genre being as old as it is now, another thing that's important to consider is that not only as the game changes, it's also the players. So a lot of the times it's simply a case of people finding a game that they like, and while they used to be more social, these days they're just less so. It's pretty common as people age and they establish their friends groups and so on that they become less social in general. But yet still, over the course of years or decades, the game itself has become this sort of comfort activity for them. It's a relatively consistent part of their routine that they can immerse themselves into and enjoy this familiar world, yet still with new, unfamiliar things being developed into them every day. And that's where their focus and comfort lies. It's more in the gameplay and the world rather than the individual people who inhabit it. Although, again, they're still important. Speaking of comfort, social interaction, as rewarding and as fun as it might be, can also be draining. One of the many reasons why people can become less social as they age is that friendships and relationships do take a certain amount of commitment. If you fail to maintain them, they can eventually fade. And as the player base gets older and more responsibilities are being piled into our laps, the idea of making new friends can become less appealing. In the context of the MMO, in terms of the higher end stuff like raiding, this means being available at certain hours of the day, on certain days of the week, and not only that, but also to perform well in your role so you're not dragging your team down, which is even more time of studying your class, rotations, boss mechanics, PvP matchups, and that's all fine if that's naturally appealing to you and that's what you want out of your experience. But what's undeniable is that it's a commitment, which means reduced freedom. So you can also see the flip side and understand just why a player might feel less social in that way. It's just nice sometimes to turn your brain off and dive into this comforting, familiar world with the option to interact with other people if you wish. However, with no obligations to do so other than your pure free will. Again, kind of getting back into the idea of getting value from the shared world, even if you don't directly interact with the people in it, while at the same time having the freedom to play as long as you want, as little as you want, as intensely as you want, or as casually as you want. Next we have Occam's razor. The most simple solution is usually the culprit, and some people are just introverted, which is fine. I don't think it's quite elite to say that gaming can draw a rather introverted crowd. It's a hobby that you can learn by yourself at a base level that doesn't really require any type of social commitment. And MMOs are very appealing to introverts because they're a very casual way of getting some form of social interaction. It's a genre that can attract a lot of introverted people, and the thing about introverts is that sometimes, well, a lot of the times, they just want to do their own thing, which again is fine, and I'm speaking as an introvert here. Sometimes they'll engage with others if they want, but a lot of the times they're just grinding XP with Netflix and the other monitor, or listening to some monotone fuck who's obsessed with MMOs. And next, we also have the fact that the genre today is just made to be more single-player oriented. So this particular subject itself is its own whole thing that's probably video-worthy. We'll just get into it a little bit here, but it's undeniable that the MMO today, compared to its formative years, is a far less social experience. Just using World of Warcraft here for an example, since that's what most everyone is familiar with. You of course have things like dungeon finders, raid finders, group quests being phased out, mob tag sharing, trade skills interacting through work orders instead of direct trades and communication, and even things such as AI teammates. And this is the source of a lot of frustration for some people. I mentioned earlier this is quite a divisive topic, and this is one of the main reasons, is that developers a lot of the times can cater to these solo players in destructive ways. Instead of providing ample solo experiences, sometimes they take what were once cornerstone features of the social nature of the game and mold and transform them to be more accessible for the solo player at the cost of the game's social atmosphere. And while all of that is understandable, I think that the frustration is ultimately misplaced. You know, it's the developer's job to understand the genre like the back of their penis, and because it's a multiplayer game, that any small change they make can have this huge butterfly effect. There's a very tricky and special balance and understanding not only of the genre of the game that you're working on, but also the ever-changing player base who plays it. It's far from an easy job, but you know, that's what they're paid to do, and even then a lot of it is out of their control due to things such as the previously mentioned aging, less social player base, or things like everything surrounding the game stifling its social atmosphere. I think that people can tend to get tunnel visioned on the game itself and its design, and sort of neglect the fact that everything surrounding the game has also changed. I mentioned earlier that World of Warcraft was one of the first forms of social media back in 2004. Yeah, back in 2004, which was still when the genre was largely undiscovered. And over the course of the past 20 years, the player base has become increasingly more and more familiar with the genre itself as well as each specific game. They're more skilled, they're more knowledgeable. Third-party database websites and social media platforms have full guides of new features and class rotations and optimized play before they're even released. So one of the reasons why there are so many solo players today is because the world outside of the game has removed reasons for it to be social. It's sort of sucked them out like a vampire. For every person who finds an optimal class rotation on YouTube, that's one less person asking in general chat how to increase their DPS, which removes a critical opportunity for social interaction. For every person that's chatting in a class Discord, that's one less person chatting in the game. So again, if we're trying to pin blame on people and on these solo players for having a negative effect on the social atmosphere of the game, you can see it's a very complicated situation with many things to consider. So it just doesn't feel all that fair to point the finger at the boomer who just wanted to log in, turn their brain off, and farm some mud crabs outside of Relica after a long day of work while he watches his kids and tries to keep them from swallowing Legos and painting the dog so his wife doesn't divorce him. But all this being said, solo players are still a core and integral part of the MMORPG genre due to the simple fact that they exist. Them playing and being in the world and being a part of it adds value to everyone's experience, even other solo players, and even if they never speak a single word or interact with one another. I myself have been on both sides of the fence. At the very start, I mentioned the two types of players, the soloer and the person who only plays when they have friends on. And at first I was really introverted until eventually I made friends and I joined a guild, at which point I was on the opposite end of the spectrum and I would really only play when my friends were playing. Oh. And now today I would say I'm kind of leaning more towards into solo play, as MMOs are definitely a comfort activity for me. I do think that both types of players are uniquely important to the genre in their own way, and I hope that this video helps the more social players see the different side of things, and hopefully for the more solo-oriented players, maybe this helped you articulate the reasons why you play this way if you didn't really think about it as autistically as I have. But let me know what you think. I like making these MMO videos because they always spark interesting discussions in the comments. Let me know if you have anything to add or if I missed anything, but whatever the case may be, I hope that you did find the video helpful. Like it if you liked it, because I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.